I don't know that I could have been a successful artist in any other town. Now I'm known in a lot of other towns, but it's because of the people here, because of the people who helped raise me in this town.
Oh, once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know.
Welcome to Not Forgotten, a podcast brought to you by the Doc Booth Foundation and hosted by noted writer Lyman, who has chronicled the stories, culture, and character of Utah's Dixie for more than 40 years.
This is a day I've been looking forward to for a long time. The chance to sit down with my best friend, Roland Lee, and be able to talk about his life and his family and his experience here in Utah's Dixie and what all that means, what it's meant to him and his family, but what he and his family have meant to this place. Roland Lee, for those who might not realize it, is one of the foremost artists. He's a watercolor artist, one of the great artists of America. He's very well known here locally, but his paintings hang in galleries and private collections and homes. I think there's more than 2,000 places where his paintings hang all over the world. He is known and beloved as an artist, but we know him here in St. George as just a great and wonderful man. And for me personally, I know him as a dear friend. But Roland, take us back. Let's go back to your boyhood, because you weren't originally a Dixie boy, even though that's in your genes and you can share your ancestry with us. But take us back to those days in Southern California.
First of all, thanks for inviting me to be here. You and I have been friends for like 43 years, something like that. Pretty close.
Yep.
And so you and I have done so many things together and so many projects since we've been here. I'm grateful for a chance to be here and talk today. Well, you grew up as a skinny cowboy kid in St. George. I couldn't have been further from that as possible. I grew up, was born and raised in Los Angeles.
You were a skinny kid, though.
I was skinnier than you, yes. But I didn't ride a horse back then, of course, living in Southern California. Growing up, we played cowboys and Indians all the time, and it was dear to our heart to Hopalong Cassidy and the Lone Ranger, and those were very real people to us. We'd see them on TV and put on our guns and holsters and play cowboys and Indians. But I never, ever thought I would actually own a horse, which I did thanks to you, or have a corral in my backyard or anything else. But all of that came about years later. So we were in California. Actually, my mom and dad were living in Idaho after World War II. My dad was in the Army, and they were homesteading up there. And he got killed in an accident up there. And I wasn't part of the family at that time. I was born about 8 months after he was killed. So I don't even know if my mom knew that she had me by then. But her family was Los Angeles family. So after that, she returned to California, and that's where I was born. And I enjoyed California. I thought that was the most important place in the world. We had the ocean, we had, all the big name stars and stuff, and the movie industry and everything like that. It just seemed like we were the center of the universe. But we lived in little tiny houses. We didn't have very much money, and we enjoyed growing up down there, but never thought that we would ever remotely be out west. And that's the place that you grew up in. So our childhoods were so remarkably different that you can't even compare it. But
I would guess that those neighborhoods that you lived in, was it West Covina where you grew up?
Yeah.
I would think that those suburban neighborhoods were a lot like a suburban neighborhood in St. George as far as kids, getting together, playing, all the kinds of things you did, although you were in a much more urban situation.
Yes. If there was a vacant lot, we would have taken it over, and build underground huts and everything else. But there were no vacant lots, even when I was young. All the orange groves had been taken up by housing projects after the war, and things just were very, very urban. But we played out in the street at night, and we'd do like you see on TV, yell, car, and we'd all get out of the street, and then the car would pass, and we'd come back out again, and we would play baseball, the same as you did up here, or kick the can, or some of the night games. When the street lights came on, we would go home. Now, that's similar to what you did, only we were in the middle of the city. We didn't have any place we could really go to breathe or for adventure, except for when we went to the beach. And when we went to the beach, we had the ocean and the waves and body surfing and later on real surfing and those kinds of things, which were a part of our childhood. And I look back fondly on that, but that's the main thing that I bring with me from Los Angeles.
It's funny, though, because you talk about maybe longing for or wishing that you lived in the West. And I remember growing up thinking, wow, wouldn't it be awesome to live by the ocean and to go to the beach? I think I was 12 years old before I ever saw the ocean. It's funny how what's familiar to you is familiar, and what's over that mountain is something exotic and pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's always more exciting on the other side. But we actually had cousins in Utah that I really never knew until I was maybe 10 or 11 years old to visit them. And that was interesting, but so different, so different for us.
Do you remember the first time you really saw this place and knew that it was a place?
What drew me here, I may as well say right now, is Zion National Park. That was the big drawing card for me, but I had never even been there. I never went to Zion or saw its red cliffs until I was a teenager. And I was impressed with it. I thought it was cool. But it was a little bit later in my teen years that my wife's dad, who's a contractor, acquired 5 acres of land in heavy ponderosa pines right on the east boundary of Zion National Park. And he built a cabin there. And because I was good friends with Nellie, and she invited me to come up and help build that cabin. So we actually, from Los Angeles to here at that time, took a lot longer than it does now to get here. So he would load his lumber on the back of his truck, and then Nellie and I would go ahead and sit on top of that stack of lumber and drive all the way up here from California.
No way.
Yeah, way.
You rode
we rode on
all
top
the way
the pile
from
of
Los
lumber.
Angeles to East Zion on top
Yes.
of a load of lumber.
It also wasn't against the law then, too, so we were able to pull it off. But so he would bring up scrap lumber and stuff from his other projects, remodeling projects. So we started building that cabin.
So let me just ask you, as you came over Utah Hill on Old Highway 91, and there's the Cayenda Cliffs and Pine Valley Mountain and all, and you're sitting on top of a load of lumber?
Uh-huh. And I could see out on the horizon there, the red cliffs, and there was John Wayne on his horse coming across them.
That was my dad, I think.
Well, it could have been Kelton, now that I think about it. But, we were out west. It was fantastic. So, that's where I first started to get a feel for this place, which began to be amplified as Nellie and my relationship grew over the years. We came up to the cabin many, many times, and it really was my desire to to make this place my home one day. You know, I thought that would be the coolest thing in the world. But I graduated from college, and Nellie and I got married the same week that I graduated from college. We went back to California, and I had a job.
When you say graduate, that was BYU.
Graduated from BYU, yeah. I got a degree in illustration and design from BYU in 1971, and we went back to California, and I had a job in an ad agency.
Okay, I'm going to put it in perspective. I was just getting my driver's license when you graduated from BYU.
I think I saw, maybe it was you in a 54 Ford on St. George Boulevard. It narrowly missed us at the corner of Main and St. George Boulevard. Could that have been you?
Possibly,
Oh, okay.
but I was mainly driving a 68 Ford pickup,
With good rims on it, too.
chrome rims.
Yeah, pulling a horse trailer
Yeah.
that you had bought yourself. But this isn't about you, is
No,
it?
this isn't about me.
But you can't get away with anything because it's all recorded. Well, yeah, I went to BYU, but think about that. All the trips we made to go from Los Angeles to Provo and back and back and back and coming home for Christmas and so forth, we came through St. George dozens of times. And so I became very familiar with the Utah terrain and what St. George was, which was a very, very small little pioneer town.
Speaking of pioneers, how aware were you at that point of your ancestry?
Well, I knew I had ancestors who were pioneers, of course, because I had them on both my mom and dad's side. And I also knew that the Lees and the Woodburys were in the 1861 pioneers who were called by Brigham Young to come down here and work the land and make something out of it. And we all know what the land looked like back then, and it was a tough thing. So, yeah, we knew we had pioneers who had done this, and it was in the back of my mind. But it really didn't hit till we got familiar with other people, and I would say, wait, we have those ancestors too. And we started to realize there were other people who were related to those ancestors who came down, and it made it feel more familiar to us. And we started to really just pull in the stories and the feelings that were here and become more a part of us and a part of our family and who we are. And I think that was important. I don't know if it could have happened any other way than having us come here and be absorbed into the Dixie spirit, if I can say that, and just begin to feel like, this is home. We should have been here from the start.
That's such a common theme for a lot of people. They come here either by choice or they ended up here somehow, and then they start to realize how deep their roots are here. And it's a really special thing.
Well, it is, and it has been for us, and we've never regretted 1 second moving here. You know, we weren't very old. We were in our early 20s when we moved here. So in a way, Dixie has raised us, you know. Southern Utah has been a part of us for a big, big portion of our lives.
I've seen pictures of you and Nellie in that time. And Roland, I think you were a bona fide hippie when you moved here to St. George. Is that correct?
We sure looked like it when we look at the pictures. Nellie and I both had long hair, and I had a beard, and yeah, we looked like a couple of hippies. I'm surprised that St. George accepted us so readily, but they did, and we're happy about that.
That's great. And I know that you enjoyed the beach growing up and all of that. At some point, you started riding motorcycles, and that seemed to be
yes.
part of what you loved about this area, too.
That was back in the day. We started riding dirt bikes, and we would ride over every inch of this
I'm
land.
sure you rode right across this lot where we're sitting right now.
Absolutely. We had to get out to Arizona. Right where we're recording this was a great part of it. We'd come right down across the freeway, which wasn't there yet, but where it is, where it should have been, and come out here and ride all over these hills out here and explore. And, we'd put on our bike helmets and our high point boots and our gloves, and we felt like John Wayne in the Conquerors or something, And we would say, okay, that one peak over there, clear across the valley over there, go. And we just go. And if we came to dirt washouts or whatever, we just went through them and just rode out across there, never thinking that maybe we're driving over something, a plant or a creature or something that might be having a good life there until we arrived. And so we would just ride all over this country. I can't think of a part of it that we didn't ride either on motorcycles or horseback eventually of this land. And now it's completely covered with homes and businesses and hotels and resorts and things like that, beyond our comprehension.
So, Roland, you bear some of the blame for that. Actually, you bear a lot of blame for that, because what were you doing when you came to St. George?
Yes, I was one of the early immigrants who came here. I escaped from L.A., and I have to admit that once we were here, we hoped nobody else would ever come. But at that time, the thought was never in our mind that this place could grow to be what it is.
Well, it must have crossed your mind, because what you were doing at that time was telling the rest of the world about St. George.
No, you were telling the rest of the world. I was doing pictures.
You were doing it a long time before I was. You were involved in the advertising business.
Oh, I forgot about that.
And it's awesome to think you really were in those beginning stages of St. George, turning from this sleepy little place into what it's become. And you were behind the scenes designing the ads, putting together all the awesome graphics and the concepts for ads for housing and for all kinds of things.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, I'm one of the last remaining living businessmen from that time. All of the people back then, we knew everybody. We knew everybody in this town. We knew who ran all the businesses. It was beautiful. We were just so comfortable here in that situation. So I was an artist. I was a designer, illustrator, and I had worked in companies in Los Angeles, had a very good job. The last one I had, very good, a very large international company, and I was the art director. And they were shocked when I told them, we're going to move to a cabin in Utah. We made it sound more glamorous than perhaps it was at the time. But everybody said, well, that sounds okay. That sounds great, and except for the people who we worked for, and they didn't like it. But since I had been in advertising a little bit, I opened an art studio, and I called it Inkwell. And that was the name of my studio, Inkwell. And I went and found a place to rent right at the corner of St. George Boulevard and Main Street. And right then there was where Zions Bank is now. There had been a grocery store, and the Miles family had turned it into some offices, which, offices for what? At that time there wasn't very much going on. So for $150 a month, I got an office facing the street on that corner from Rick Miles, and he rented it to me, and I hung up my sign, and I started doing artwork.
Help us again to know where that is. Is it where Ancestor Square is now?
No,
or on the
Zions Bank.
Oh, on the south.
On the southeast corner. I know how you can get that mixed up, because I had a place on every one of those corners eventually.
Okay, because I knew you were on the other side at the Big Hand before it became Ancestor Square.
How that happened was I eventually ended up, there was Big Hand Cafe was on that corner, and Dr. Grain had made a little clinic or something right next to that Big Hand Cafe on one side. Yeah, on the other side was a kind of a one-story building Well, it was a 2-story building, but only about as wide as one room. And we moved over there. And that happened after we turned it from Inkwell into Inkwell Advertising. I took on a partner. His name was Jack Tibbetts. He's passed away now. And he did radio stuff, and I did all the visuals, and I did all the what we called print advertising at the time. And we were a full-service advertising agency to this big, big town. So we did know everybody who had a business here, and we started doing advertising for so many of the companies. It was great when Center Department Store opened up. We did their advertising, and Lester Gubler was the manager of that, and he had been over at Penny's before that. Anyways, one of our stars was SkyWest Airlines. Ralph Atkin had started this little kind of a commuter airline. And I remember the 6-passenger Navajo chieftains, and Jerry Atkin has corrected me on that in recent years. He says there was one more seat next to the pilot that somebody could sit in on those. And I said, okay, I stand corrected. We use the slogan, we make it fun to fly. The reason is we try to show that it was fun to fly just barely above the sagebrush and the cactus, and to be able to see cars below you and the things going by. And of course, at the time, that was a very small airline, and we did their advertising for them, and we even wondered if they were ever going anywhere. And then Jerry Atkin got out of college. He had an MBA, and he came over, and he said they offered him a job, and he thought, well, I don't know. I know I can help you guys, but he didn't know if he wanted to take over that kind of, it wasn't floundering per se, but it was a startup. And so he took it over, and now it's beyond belief.
It's a $3 or $4 billion a year business.
At least.
And at that time, they were probably really struggling just to pay you for your time and
absolutely.
and
in fact, when Jerry came on, he cut us off because that was peripheral funds that needed to be used for something else in his MBA of mine. And of course, we're good friends with Jerry and Ralph both, and the whole Atkin family. I think it's remarkable what they did, and we were glad to be a part of it.
It's so great to hear that story from your perspective, and to know that there were a lot of things going on in the community that was part of that in those days when people were wondering, will this ever get off the ground? But everybody was pitching in and bringing their talent to the table, and in that case, it became something truly great. And in many other cases, I mean, I know you worked in the early days of TerraCore with Bloomington and Bloomington Hills and other initiatives that were part of this bigger vision of what we could become. And here you are in this little room off the boulevard and Main Street, designing ads and helping put all of that together.
Well,
pretty cool to think about that.
Coming from L.A. and working for advertising agencies, I could do it. I could handle everything. I knew all there was to know about the advertising business, even though my side of it was more the art side. But we really were a full-service agency during that time, and we would have to go sell ourselves to these businesses. We worked for the Larkins. Alan Coombs developed Green Valley out there. In fact, I remember riding in a truck with Alan Coombs, and we drove out there because that was clear over the Black Ridge out in the middle of nowhere. And he says, we're going to develop this area, and we're going to call it the New St. George. And I told him, I says, pardon me, but I think that's kind of, I don't get it. What, it's, you sure you want to call it that? Why don't you call it Green Valley or something? Because at the time it was all beautiful hay, Lucerne, everything, everywhere was this beautiful fields and stuff. And he says, Okay. And so they called it Green Valley after that. And we helped with advertising through that time and through the tough times when interest rates shot through the roof. And it was hard to even give away one of the townhomes that they had built out there. Beautiful developments, beautiful things that they built. And the hotel, the Four Seasons Inn, was a big new hotel.
That was the Larkins,
Yeah.
Dale and Daryl.
Well, yeah, it was the Larkin family that did that. I dealt mostly with Dale and Daryl, and they were involved in other things as well, investment type things. There was a brand new printing shop here called AccuPrint, and John Rogers had that. And before I even moved here, I went to talk to him, and I went to talk to Ben Brown, one of the local printers, and I went over and talked to the Mountfords at the Washington County News, and the Spectrum was just starting up there. They called it the Color Country Spectrum, the second newspaper. You know, who could believe it? And we worked with John Miner and Brent Miner. Brent was just a kid at KDXU, and of course that was the only radio station here. There was no FM radio here. It was just that station. So advertising was easy. We knew everyone. We knew all the advertising mediums. We could make deals to get stuff on. We could invent events that, you know, to help promote and everything else. And so back then, especially the real estate people, Frank Pierce, when he saw my portfolio, he said, "This is wonderful. This is just like in the city. We could get these brochures before we built this place." And, you know, and I said, "Yeah, I can do it. You know, we got the printers up here. We can work with them." And Byron McLeese at Dixie Realtors, all of the realtors were doing projects and used our services.
Dusty Fonsback at Bloomington. You worked with him quite a bit.
Oh, we worked with Dusty a lot, and Jeff Morby from TerraCore. And gosh, you know, they're the ones that started Bloomington and then Bloomington Hills and went on from there. But at the time, we felt like, gosh, people should know about this place. People should move here. Well, we built our first home on 750 South, just a year or two after we moved here. And beyond us was the land that, Lyman, you grew up with as your playground. There was nothing between here and the gorge. And there was no freeway through the gorge at that time either. On the other side of it, there was no Bloomington Hills. And there was barely Bloomington started. And I remember the mayor getting on the radio and saying, "St. George is not a sleepy little town anymore." And I thought, at the time, hey, you haven't got a clue. This is the sleepiest little town I ever saw.
Roland, that is such a great impression of Neil Lundberg.
Oh,
Is that who you were quoting?
well, I didn't want to, you know, specifically say his name. But,
That is
but he
awesome.
was
It's like you were channeling him. That's so great.
Well, I'll never forget it, because I'll never forget that, and calling down to Bloomington where the gal on the phone would always say, "It's a beautiful day in Bloomington." And I think Jeff Morby married her, if I think about it clear back then. But those were good times, but we were still the small little town that.
And really, this small little town with big vision, but really nothing to back it up yet.
Here's what, one of the things that Mayor Lundberg and others did was they started building this little golf course, the Dixie Red Hills Golf Course, 9 holes, that's still there, and it's still a beautiful place and still a fun golf course. We didn't realize at the time that there would one day be like 20 or 30 golf courses around here, and it just goes on and on and on. We just couldn't imagine it. But we did feel like people should know about this place, that we could have more business here.
But there was not only that kind of breaking through with that vision, but there was also all the economic issues of those days with interest rates and everything that was going on. I remember you telling me about an ad or something about a TerraCore ad that with an interest rate Do you remember?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, we prepared the ad for him, and I was just thumbing through this album before we talked, and the ad says, "Get your loan now. It's only 8.75%. It could go up any time." And now, people today getting loans can't imagine interest rates that high. But then the home they were advertising was $79,000. We built our first home here for $35,000. All of us now are saying, well, why didn't we do 10 of those at the time? Because we didn't know. We didn't know it. We couldn't imagine. We never thought.
You didn't want to miss out on that 8.75%.
Hey, I know a lot of people who forfeited their land at that time, and it was just too high, too difficult to get money to do anything. And I know that Alan Coombs with Green Valley, they built a beautiful, amazing resort. It was beautiful then, it's beautiful now, and they could hardly give away the townhomes in there. The prices were so cheap.
During a certain period.
During that certain period, yeah. Of course, now you'd be thinking, God, why don't we buy all the rest of this land around here? It's just so different. We're in a different mindset.
All of those visionaries like Alan Coombs and the people from Derrickor and the Larkin family and all these folks, that they had these visions for this place, and they've all come true.
Yeah, that's true. It makes you think, like, if you could go back, you say, well, just hold on, just hold on to that land, hold on to this, the time's going to get better, but at the time you think, I got to get out of this before I go broke. Interest rates might go up to 9%, and it's just different. It's hard for me to imagine, but, some people still bet on it, like when my father-in-law was a contractor here, and they moved here to St. George before we did, and they built this house that we eventually owned on 750 South. Well, I promise you that any house that Ben ever built, I helped on, because he would get on the phone and he would say, hey, I'm pouring a slab in the morning. Can I get you to come over here? And I said, you bet. One time we were building, it may have been our cabin, and there was 3 of us up on the roof, and he says, all I got up here is 2 school teachers and a hippie. And that was really true, And so at the time, he said, look, the buyer fell through on that house he was doing, probably because of interest rates. Okay, so at that time, I went to Dick Mathis, who was the manager of St. George Savings and Loan, which is one of the big financial institutions. He was a wonderful person to deal with. And so Nellie's dad, Ben, went to him and said, look, our buyer fell through. I want to have my kids buy that house from us. Well, we would have never qualified for a loan, and we were 25 years old, and new in town or anything like that. And Dick says, okay, we can do that for you. And he knew that because Ben was reliable, that he would make the loan to us. Ben wasn't on the deed or anything, or did a second. He just gave the loan to us as kids. But the house only cost $35,000. Our loan on that first house on 750 South was $35,000. And now you can't even buy a car for $35,000. It just was so different back then. Everybody knows that who's still alive can remember this.
So, Roland, you were using your art to exercise your marketing skills in those days. And a transition occurred after that.
Yeah.
A transition that carries through to today. Take us through being an advertising designer and executive to becoming a full-time fine artist.
Well, there's an interesting segue to that. Part of it was when we moved here to southern Utah, another gentleman moved here with his wife, retired, and his name was Robert Shepard. And Robert Shepard started doing watercolor paintings of the landscape around here. And I saw him, and I said, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. I wanted to do paintings just like he was doing. And so he instantly became my mentor. Self-appointed, of course, my mentor. And I copied whatever he did. And he was using watercolors and his techniques and the colors he was using. I did the same thing, the paper he was using. And I started doing watercolors, and they were pretty good. Then I took a workshop or two and really launched into it. But at that time, before I started painting, I had been hired by Dixie College. Had a new president. His name was Rolf Kerr. And he didn't like outsourcing. He was outsourcing the advertising and publication work to us at Inkwell Advertising, which I no longer owned. That was the same time I made a transition and had sold the company. He wanted somebody over there full time. So I sold the company and went and did that and figured, oh, this will be great. I'll have steady income, insurance, all the things you don't have as a private entrepreneur. And so I started over there doing their publication and advertising and sports information director, everything you can do for a school. I was doing it, and I could do it because of my background. I could do anything. At that time, the newspapers only accepted black and white photography. So I would shoot, I would go down to the darkroom, I would process the film, make the prints, and go upstairs to this electric typewriter, type up an article with my secretary, or I would get it sent out. Okay, I knew how to do all that, take pictures, and I would design their publications.
Let me jump in here because for a lot of our listeners, the idea of all of this is quite foreign pre-digital age.
Yeah.
What you were doing all through those years with the advertising and the design and all the work you did, there was nothing digital about it. It was all hand done.
Yeah.
Even the illustrations and the lettering and the logo design and everything was hand inked, hand done.
Yep. Computers weren't really active in business quite yet, but during the 80s, that was. But this was between 1976 and 1980, and that was a real early time for computers. And I know our family had a Commodore 64, and before that a VIC-20 and an Atari 520 ST, and all of these early computers that were trying to break into the home. And of course, then came Apple, that kind of took over the world. But at that time, everything was manual. Each line of type had to be pasted onto a layout. Well, I could do all that. Nobody else in this town could do that, but I could.
But you weren't clicking a mouse or working on a keyboard. You were doing everything. It took an artist to do the kind of work that you were doing.
Yes. Well, I would have called them a graphic artist.
Yes.
What we call now, but they only work on computers. So it's much different. Everything was so different back then, to make it sound like the 1800s, but it really was. It was so different from now. But anyways, so I was at the college and I started painting. I moved from there into just teaching art in the art department. So I spent 2 years just teaching art, not doing the the public relations anymore. I thought that was really cool, but I started painting. And so I thought, I think these are pretty good. So I framed them up, and I went down to an outdoor art show in Prescott, Arizona, called the George Phippen Memorial Art Show. And you set up your booths. I borrowed from Wally Brazil some pegboards, and I set these 6 pegboards up on the lawn and hung my paintings on it. Well, at that first show, I took 12 paintings, and I sold all of them except for one, the most expensive one I didn't sell, but I sold all the others. I'm going like, well, that's easy. I think I'll I think maybe I had to. In fact, I'm going to do this for a living. Yep, that's what I'm going to do. Well, when you're young, you don't really see the future as well, and so I did. I quit teaching at the college. We built a little studio in the back of our house on 750 South, and it was a great spot, and now I'm a full-time artist. Well, you don't have one of those shows like we had in Prescott every week. If we did, we'd be fine. So we scrambled around a little bit, and then Wally Brazil came to me and said, look, we are swamped down here. Would you please work for us for a little bit?
So Wally Brazil had acquired Inkwell?
Well, he was hired to run it, and then he bought Paul Raymond out. So Wally completely owned Inkwell Advertising. And, he was a wonderful entrepreneur. He could make anything work. He was a great front man, and he believed in what we were doing, and he could sell it to anybody.
He was amazing because he was a businessman and a promoter and an entrepreneur.
And also an artist.
And an artist.
Yeah.
And a really wonderful artist.
Really good artist.
Still is, all these years later, but he brought all of that together in one person.
That's right. And so anyways, I started working part-time for him, I think in the evenings or so. And that's where Lyman Hafen came in at that point. So I was painting full-time, working a little bit for Wally, and then Wally wanted me to come and meet this guy from Idaho. And that's all I knew about him, and it turned out to be my best friend now, Lyman Hafen. And that's where we first met up.
He wasn't from Idaho, but he was living in Idaho at that time.
But all I knew was you were from Idaho.
And it was the middle of the winter at Christmas time that I came down and met with Wally Brazil and said, Debbie and I loved Idaho Falls, but it was the middle of winter, and winter lasts forever in Idaho Falls. But I had been working for a publishing company there and had this idea for a magazine for St. George. I worked up the courage to go talk to Wally Brazil, who was the only real true advertising man in St. George. And as soon as I walked in there and showed him what I had, he said, that's exactly what I've been thinking, exactly what I've been working on for a long time, too. Let's do this. And this is at Christmas time going into 83. And he said, we can do this, Lyman, if we can get Roland Lee to be our art director for the magazine. And I'll just leave it at that, and you can take it from there.
Well, that's probably because I was the only person doing art in St. George at that time. No, we had a lot of good artists at that time too, which is a whole nother story. A wonderful support team of people working in art. But having all of my experience in publications, and I was what I would call a magazine junkie. I loved to see magazine layouts and designs. I got interested in art through the illustrations that were during the 60s, that lots of illustrators that were working then. I was very interested in their work. So it said magazine. I thought, yeah, I'm in. Count me in. And I think we all three, with our wives, went out to dinner, and now we're a team, that it just started that way. I didn't really care what the magazine was going to be. I didn't really have a vision of it yet. But all I knew is, I wanted to be the art director of it. And I think originally, didn't we plan for that to only be once a year publication?
Well, the idea was that we would do kind of a pilot issue in 1983, and then see where we could take it from there. I don't think we imagined it being more than a quarterly magazine, but we did that first issue in the spring of 83.
Mm-hmm. And I remember it had somebody in a swimming pool and a big beach ball and showing all the fun that you can have in St. George.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with snow. It had everything to do with the sun and playing in the sun.
Yeah. The whole idea was to share this place with the world, how great it was, how beautiful it was, what a awesome place it was to live. We started with that first issue, and then the second one we had Robert Redford on the cover. And I remember when we were designing that cover and you had ideas for color and design and all of that. I knew nothing about design. I remember you mocked it up and said this is how it should work. And I remember taking that home and just agonizing over it, like, this has got to be perfect. And I remember coming to your house on 750 South late in the evening and sitting down with you and saying, Roland, is this really how? And you looked at me and said, Lyman, this is good design. This is going to work. Don't worry about it. And from there forward, I didn't worry about design anymore.
Well, Lyman had magazine experience prior to coming to St. George, but I did too, and I knew what was going to work. I had all the confidence in the world. And so we did that issue. At that time, to have Robert Redford on our cover was a big deal. He was like the superstar of the world back then. Lyman did his interview with him on the phone, and everybody in the whole office is all just hovered around trying to hear Lyman talk, and he had a little recording thing on his telephone. We didn't have cell phones like we do today. You prop it up and you've got a thing on there so you can record, and we're all just listening in. And it was kind of a very, very big deal. And he was gracious, of course, but he was, I kind of saw myself in Robert Redford. I thought we looked a lot alike. I had a full beard and long blonde hair. And
so, Ricky, are you taking notes on all of this?
But he loved the land. He loved Utah. He bought land here. In fact, the lot we eventually bought in Dameron Valley was owned by Robert Redford before we bought it, because he was a good friend of Brooks Pace. And anyway, so that was just an interesting thing to feel that connection. But it was important because he loved this land. He loved the land almost as much as I did. And that's why I felt good about him being on the cover. By the way, the Call of the Canyon, the PBS special that we just did, Robert Redford narrated that in his later years, and now he's passed on already. But he was just a young person then. Anyways, it was fun.
Those were awesome days. But even then, Roland, we felt really blessed that we had you, because what really made the magazine work was that it looked so good. You can write stories and you can put stuff together, but it's got to look good, and that's what you did. You made it look awesome. And now, 40 years later, we can say, well, shoot, Roland, you made it look too good, because there were maybe 8,000 or 10,000 people in this town at that time, and now there's almost 200,000.
Yeah. I feel that way. I feel almost embarrassed to tell people we were trying to get other people to come into town back then and be involved in business and buy homes and buy the real estate. I'm almost ashamed to admit that. But, I came here from Los Angeles. I was one of those guys. We brought our family here, and you can't close the doors behind you and say no more. But we can plan, and we can make room for everybody and get the right infrastructure, and that's all we can do. We can't stop it. It's not going to change. People are coming here for a reason, and the reason they're coming here is the reason I came here, for that Dixie spirit. They still feel it. It's real. It's tangible. That feeling of love and caring. I just got an email today from a person I met while I was painting outdoors up in Midway, Utah. He and his wife were traveling all through the western states, And we met up, we talked. He showed me some of the photography he was doing. And now, a couple months later, I get an email from him that says, everyone just treated us so nice out there, and we really think we're going to move there now. I'm like, oh no, we did it again. And I just got that email this morning, and he hasn't been to a place where he felt that kind of camaraderie and instant kindness and sharing and wanting to help what he was doing and looking for, or even that would take the time to talk to him. And, we see that everywhere. All the time I spend in Zion painting outdoors, I meet a lot of people, and they're so impressed with this area. And so I tried to tell them, no, it's really not that great of a place. You consider Chicago. No, I don't, because, they feel it when they get here. They're not sure what they're feeling, but I know what they're feeling. And Lyman, when he writes about the first time that people see Zion, he says, I want people to see Zion the way I felt when I first saw Zion, and for him as a child, for me later on. And when we drive through, now we own that property that Nellie's dad had. We bought it in the 80s, and we go up every week. And I paint up at our cabin in the summertime usually. And so we pass through the park. Well, we see the congestion at the tunnel, and we see the huge lines that go back a mile at the entrance, and 4 entrance stations, and 2 of them are closed off. And, you could get angry about that. But mostly the people that I see are not angry about that. They're willing to wait. They expect to wait. They came from places where all they ever do is wait in lines. And so they come here and see it there, and they don't know it ever was. Like I would take my 2 boys in our Blazer, and we just drive up to Zion and pull in the campground and camp that night. We didn't need reservations, for crying out loud. You just go up there, and there's space for you. And that's the way it was. Back then, you could do it. Now, like this week, I was talking to Nellie, and I says, yeah, but just think, all of these people, we were kind of stacked up in a line in the park. I said, just think, all of these people, or a lot of them, are seeing it for the first time. And I wouldn't take that away from anybody. And it helps us to just go with the flow and ride through, and stop when the bighorn sheep stand there at the road and look at us, and just enjoy it, just like they are. And I'm grateful that they can get that experience. I'm happy for that, but it does come at a price.
Roland, as you talk about this concept of seeing it for the first time, it takes me back to your art. And I think perhaps the most important part of this whole story is that, yes, you were the art director of St. George Magazine for several years, probably 15 or 16 years, I think, before we sold the magazine to the Spectrum in the early 2000s. But during that time, you were establishing yourself as a fine artist. And, I mean, you were already established, but you were building that reputation to the point where when we finally did sell the magazine, that's what you've done ever since. And so much of what you've done, the hundreds, even thousands of paintings that you've done, so much of it is Zion. And what I treasure about your work, I felt this just a Saturday during the marathon when I walked into your house, because your house is along the finish
on the finish line
on 300 South, and I was there to see my son Matt running in, but I knocked on your door and walked in your house, and there's these new paintings of Zion that you've completed. And every time I look at one of your paintings of Zion, it's giving me that blessing of seeing it for the first time again, because of the way you interpret it, the amazing way that you share those images in that canyon. Every time I see a new painting of yours, it's like seeing Zion for the first time again. And to have that experience over and over is really awesome.
It's a joy to be able to produce art that can make people happy. I know at one time every room in the Dixie Medical Center was, I think they call it the St. George Regional Medical Center now, had a print of one of my paintings. And, people would call me after having spent a week in one of these rooms and say, you know what, I want to get a copy of the painting that was on my wall that time. I saw your name on it. And they treated me so good there. And I'm well now. They're so grateful to be well and out of that room. But they still want an image. The objective, really, of an artist is to create a painting, and that's enough. If you create it yourself and enjoy the process, that's enough. But in any of the arts, performing arts, visual arts, all of them, there's always an audience. So you produce it, but the culmination of that is when you convey that to an audience and they respond to it. So when somebody responds to my painting and gives me feedback on it, it makes me feel good. I produce something that someone sits in their office in some towering office building and they look up at a picture of the Great White Throne or Angel's Landing and the river down below it, thinking in their mind, I'd give anything to be there right now, And so, or if they've hiked Angel's Landing and now they want something to remind them of what they felt and what they accomplished. Well, what could be better than that? For an artist, it's one thing to make art, but the people, I wouldn't be successful at all if it wasn't for so many people who've supported me. Buyers, collectors, other artists, people who just want to see you do well. No artist can be successful without that base of people who really care about them. And I don't know that I could have been a successful artist in any other town. Now I'm known in a lot of other towns, but it's because of the people here, because of the people who helped raise me in this town. And for sure, I probably would never have ridden a horse if I hadn't met Lyman, who decided he wanted to turn me into a cowboy. And some of the greatest times I've had are thanks to that support team, him and his dad, Kelton.
To our listeners, I'd say you'd be surprised if you could have seen Roland back in the 80s on his horse, Ben, galloping around the arena, twirling a rope. I think he even caught a calf or two, didn't he?
No, I think I caught my boot, maybe. Well, I thought everyone that I saw riding looked so fluent and so smooth. I didn't realize you also had to have a degree of talent to do it. I thought I could just go out there and rope and chase a calf around and it was easy. Well, Lyman's dad, Kelton, worked with me so much and helped us both really as we tried to get a leg up on that horse and kind of guide us along. And without that, what would I have missed in life? I mean, on cattle drives with the wind and the rain and my collar turned up and a calf laid across my saddle.
I remember a little
that was me.
I remember a little doggy calf sitting across your lap across the saddle horn with you on a cattle drive one day. It was cold and rainy.
It was cold and rainy, and I have a sculpture in my home right now that Jerry Anderson, my good friend and compatriot in the arts, he did, of a cowboy on a horse kind of coming downhill, and he's got a calf across his lap and his collar turned up. And I bought that sculpture from him because it's an experience I actually had. Now, who would ever think that a Los Angeles boy or a surfer boy from California would ever end up doing that? Yeah. Well, thanks to some good people.
Well, you talk about learning that and you turn that back around to the idea of learning to draw, learning to paint, learning to create. wonderful images. I remember one artist said it takes about an acre of canvas before you can really, and I've heard you say how many paintings before you, I mean, hundreds or thousands. But you've been you've been a teacher all through these years,
Yes.
and you've spent a significant amount of your life teaching watercolor painting.
Yes, I've taught a lot of people art, but the thing that I told my own kids when they wanted to start painting, I have 3 adult children who are really good painters and win awards and sell their paintings, and just like I do. And the thing I told every one of them is I said, do 100 paintings and then come and see me again. Because I know that with that experience, they could ask the right questions. If I gave them the answers before they had the question, it wouldn't mean anything. But if I could give them the answer at the time they have the question, that's the best. And so today I don't teach large groups anymore. Monthly I have a 2-day master class for accomplished artists, very accomplished artists. And they're kind of my support team too. We love getting together. But I can get around to 6 or maybe even 8 artists and help them when they need it with that kind of a format. But we used to teach classes and go to other towns and cities all over the United States, and they would have a 3 or 4 day workshop, and they'd have 32 students in there, and they were just packing it in, and there was no way you could even get around to 10 of them. So now I can only do so much. I'm in my later years, and I don't have the stamina to do even more than that. So I'm kind of handpicking what I do now at this stage of life and what I can get around to before I have to go take a nap.
Well, Roland, you are the preeminent watercolor artist of Zion. That's known worldwide. Your books and all the things that you've done. You've painted in England and Scotland and Europe. Probably, I would say maybe 80% of your paintings are Zion, but there's a 20% of that you painted all over the world.
Yeah, we used to do a lot of traveling. A lot of that is thanks to Glenn Blakely, art teacher over at Dixie College, or Utah Tech it is now. And he was so good to take the city people out on his trips. Sometimes he'd call me and he'd say, "Hey, Roland, we're taking a trip to the museums in California, and I just had 2 people back out. Do you and your wife want to come on the bus? It won't cost you anything." And I knew good and well that there hadn't been 2 people that had dropped out. I knew that he just saved us 2 seats because he wanted us to be on that trip. And that was amazing to go on those trips with Glenn. It was just so fun. But what I noticed was he was sharing what he had with the community. It became a community thing, not a college thing or nothing to do with that. It was binding the community people together. And that's where I met a lot of the community later in life. When we first lived here, we knew everyone. I mean, you knew everyone on every street. Because St. George was just this little shape right between these 2 volcanic ridges and the Red Cliff to the north, and the cliff where Brigham Young stood on there and with a group of exploring party and looked out across this desolate land with not one single structure out there, but just sagebrush and a brown, muddy river in the foreground. And he said, one day, this will be a town with towers and spires and homes with many inhabitants. And I think, I wonder how far into the future he actually saw that vision. But he said it, he predicted it in 1861. And now I think to myself, could he have possibly seen all of this?
And I have no doubt that he saw that. I often wonder if he saw those homes pouring up over the Black Ridges and off to the other side.
Every available square foot covered with something.
Every one of those homes with an amazing view of an amazing place.
Sometimes people say, well, you had pioneer ancestors. They came down and stole the land from the Native Americans. But my answer to that is, I look to those pioneer ancestors who came here under harsh conditions, ate weeds on the sides of the rivers and stuff. They didn't have a big grocery store. They didn't have Lynn's Market or Smith's or Albertsons, or they just go down. And when I go down the aisles of those stores and see all of this food, we just have to put it in our basket and walk out, and if they could even imagine something like that. But they stayed here, and it was not easy. It was hard. And they were stoic about it, and they believed they were doing the right thing. And they tried hard to get along with the Native Americans. They knew this was their land first. They knew that this was where they had grown up and raised their children, and they tried to learn from each other. I look with gratitude to my own ancestors and those who settled this area. Yeah, it's easy to come here now, but not then. And I also feel like I can't walk anywhere in these hills or around here without either finding petroglyphs everywhere, writings on the walls. I find shards. I can show you a place within miles of here that there are so many pottery shards on the ground that you can't take a step without stepping on them today. Okay, I won't tell you where it is, but there's that place. And occasionally you even find arrowheads. And I look at those things and I think those people had such a sense of place and such a sense of belonging to this land. I owe what I have today to those pioneers and to those Native Americans. All of them made a huge sacrifice so that I, Roland Lee, could live here in the most beautiful place in the United States or anywhere, and I've been everywhere, and I know wherever I speak, and it's right here. And we have them to thank. Again, a support team of people that made it possible for us to be here and enjoy this. And I think that's just a wonderful gift.
It is, Roland. And this has been a wonderful gift to have you here in the studio today.
The Doc Booth Foundation is dedicated to empowering individuals through educational opportunities and promoting mental health advocacy. Through scholarships and funding for important community needs, the foundation perpetuates the can-do spirit of the founders of this community, using the lessons of the past to chart the course for a better future. Make your tax-deductible donation at docboothfoundation.org. Not Forgotten is produced by Ricky Valadez and made possible by the generous support of St. George Area Zag Stores, industry-leading tech support and accessories. Lyman Hafen's books can be found at lymanhafen.com.
Once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. We came to Dixie